Hey guys, welcome back to the Impact Players Coaching Cohort Series, Husband Coaching. I'm Warren Maynard, the Executive Director of Impact Players, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us today for Session 4, Spaghetti and Waffles. We have an incredible session planned for you today, so get ready to dive deep into understanding and communicating with your spouse, even in the midst of your differences. But before we get into that, let me welcome our co-host for today, my good friend, the big game coach, Matt Wimmer.
Great to be here.
All right. Well, several years ago, authors and counselors Bill and Pam Farrell introduced this idea of how men are like waffles and women are like spaghetti. So men are like waffles in that they compartmentalize every little thought of their day. They're very focused in these little boxes. And women are like spaghetti. All of their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions are all kind of interspersed with one another, interconnected and overlapping. And so men often operate in one box at a time, whereas women, they're kind of have everything going on through their minds at the same time. So Matt, we talked in our last session about romance, sex, and intimacy, and that's a great example because when I'm in the sex box, all I'm thinking about is sex. But when my wife is in that same position, she's also thinking about what's going on with the dog. Is the door locked? What are the kids up to? What happens if somebody comes to the doorbell? These are the things that I'm dealing with at work. And all of these things are going on at the same time. So these major differences that we can experience as husbands and wives can really present some unique challenges when it comes to the way that we communicate and understand one another. So Matt, in your marriage and in the marriages that you've been able to observe and counsel, how have you seen these unique differences of men being like waffles and women being like spaghetti?
Well, I think it's just as you said. I mean, I think about when I go to the store, okay? If I head to Home Depot, I know exactly where I'm headed, what I'm going to get, and it's a straight shot, and maybe that's not a great example. I might hang out at Home Depot a little longer. But if it's a department store and I have to go pick up something, for whatever reason, I'm going in straight to that department, I'm finding that article, I'm headed to the register, and I'm out of the store.
I need a belt, I'm going in, I get my belt, and I walk out.
Exactly. So where, she is going to visit, nearly every department in that store, and it's going to look like, if you were to draw it out, a plate of spaghetti. So I like that analogy a lot. I think it's easy for us as men, and that's how God wired our brains generally, is to be able to compartmentalize that, we're maybe a little bit less emotionally engaged, and that helps us. It's just how we're designed. It helps us in so many different ways, certainly in the work functions, and her brain, that's just something to understand that, a woman's core difference is, I would say a woman's core need, one of her core needs is us understanding as men that our brains are just differently wired. So, and I think the waffles and spaghetti is a great picture of that.
And it is, and I think it's easy for men to think, well, we are better, we've got the better way of thinking. It's easier for women to think we're better, we've got the better way of thinking. But ultimately, like we talked about in our first session, in Genesis chapter 2, it says God created male and female. And he wires us according to the way that he wanted us to be created. So the fact that we're different doesn't come as a surprise to God.
Sure.
It's actually a part of what makes those relationships both fun and exciting, but also it can be frustrating and confusing. So we're going to really talk about communication. And there's one particular passage of scripture that I want us to really dive into today. And over the last several years, I've started referring to this as the play. And, you know, we call this the playbook.
Yep.
And there are lots of plays in the book, but this is one for me in particular that I have drawn upon hundreds of times over the last few years as I've learned how to better understand this. And this is...
I'm leaning in.
Yeah. Okay, so Matt, this is what I call the play. James 1, 19 through 20. And it says this: "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." So, Coach, we have 3 action steps in this play. Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Would you say that defines the way that most people behave in heated situations?
Not at all. I thank you for this play. It's very convicting. Having been married now for 28 years, too often I'm guilty of completing Cindy's thoughts, as she's communicating something, and because of my personality of wanting to go, I might jump in and try to complete the thought, and rarely is it correct.
Right.
And so I definitely
or
can
appreciated.
Learn. Or appreciated. So I
even if it is correct.
Yeah, even if it is. So I definitely can learn, from the scripture about the importance of hearing first. So
yeah, and let's be honest, we live in a world where everybody is reacting, right? It's just before you even finish your sentence, somebody is up in arms about your opinion that they disagree with, and if you don't see it their way, then their anger is boiling through the roof. And even among Christians, we can see that. Even in church, we can see that. People losing their cool and not understanding one another, not communicating with one another. And of course, that happens very frequently within a marriage because, like you said, oftentimes we're like, as men, we're saying, hey, let's get through this as quickly as possible. I've got other boxes that I need to check right now. And your spaghetti monologue is really frustrating me, right? And so what I want us to do is kind of walk through those 3 components that James lays out as a play for communication with us. And the first one is that we are to be what?
Sounds like really good listeners.
Right.
Yeah.
Quick to hear, quick to listen. So let's talk about active listening. What does active listening look like in a marriage relationship?
Well, I think, it means that I'm truly seeking to understand, which is not always, intuitive. It might be different than how you and I communicate. There may even be some smoke screens. There might be some fog that I need to, wade through. I think I need to maybe sometimes act more like a private eye. And so, but it's seeking to understand. It's replaying back. Let me make sure that I heard you correctly, and did I truly understand? And I'm not trying to be difficult, certainly not exasperate. I'm just truly trying to lean in here and understand. So I think if we approach it that way, even if the spaghetti is going through and she may even come to their own conclusion, I'm not making a lot of sense, she'll appreciate that we've done our best to lean in. So.
Absolutely. And Matt, you talk about conviction and confession. Confession is good for the soul, right?
It is, yeah.
So, I have a master's degree in communication, right? So I should be like the best at this, correct? And there have been many times over the years where my wife has been sitting in on a training session that I've done, a leadership training session for up and coming leaders, and I've talked about active listening, and I've talked about the importance of what you said, reflective listening, and being able to acknowledge that you're listening with your facial expressions and your eyes and your gestures. And I've come home and my wife has said, boy, you really know a lot about that stuff, but a lot of times you seem to forget when you walk in the front door.
Oh, uh-oh.
It's a great reminder that, especially for us in business, a lot of men, maybe if you're in sales or something like that, you know what to do. It's not a matter of whether or not you know how to do active listening. It's a matter of, are you staying motivated to do it? Are you being intentional about it? And so if my customer is important enough for me to make sure that I'm really hearing them and I'm responding to them and acknowledging that I understand what they're saying, my wife should be infinitely more important than a customer. So let's make sure that we don't take off our communication skills as we walk through the front door. All right, so the second skill that we want to talk about is thoughtful conversation. Speaking and contributing to the conversation in a thoughtful way that reflects consideration and empathy. So Matt, maybe describe a time when, and you've already kind of shared this, but describe a time when you jumped ahead to the solution and unintentionally communicated a lack of concern for your spouse, and maybe what would you or should you have done differently?
Describe a time. I mean, that's just, it's every day of the week.
Yesterday at 1:45.
So, literally, yesterday we were having lunch with friends. Cindy was sharing a story. It was a great story. There was a lot of detail to the story, and I completely jumped the gun as far as I was ready to, get to the punchline so we can, go to the next topic. So, that in that moment was not building her up. It was not, encouraging her. I'm guilty of it all the time. So, not being slow to speak and just letting her, or even, last night she was trying to communicate, how she was feeling in the moment. And I kept jumping like this versus, no, that's not, versus just allowing her to finish the thought and work through maybe what she was thinking verbally. So,
and it can be difficult to bite your tongue and to not want to jump in to finish a story. It can be downright impossible when your wife is directing some criticism towards you. I know I have experienced that where, I'm being told that I'm not doing this a certain way correctly, or this is hurting my wife, or this is frustrating her in some way. And the natural reaction is just to boil up, fire out a defensive comment to try to, deflect or inflict a mutual pain on her in order to spare myself the pain of receiving what she's saying. And again, as I talked about how this is a play that I've learned to repeat in my life, what I've kind of come to learn is that I need to allow her to get all of those feelings out, whether or not I believe that they're accurate or truthful. I need her to know that I understand and perceive that what she's saying is deeply felt by her. And by allowing her to get those out and to be thoughtful in responding instead of reacting has been a game changer for how we communicate with one another, because now she knows, okay, I'm not going to cut her off in order to get my point in. Most men and most of us in general, our natural reaction is to be thinking about what we're going to say while she's saying what she's trying to say. So this idea of thoughtful conversation can really, be critical. And then the third one is patient restraint. So controlling the urge to speak out of frustration, anger, because of some previous argument that may have come up, or complaints or criticisms in the past. So Matt, how do you navigate those types of moments when things are heated? And it may be related to you, it may be related to the kids, it may be related to another situation, but whatever it is, you feel your emotions beginning to boil. How do you practice that patient restraint? Because we know what the scripture says. The anger of man, it never produces the righteousness of God.
Yeah, that's a powerful question, and I think after 28 years of marriage, I've certainly learned to trust my wife's intuition. She has great wisdom, great insight. Again, knows me better than anyone. Just like we established at the beginning, God brought us together. She's a suitable helper for me. And, we're walking side by side with God in the garden. And so sometimes you're right. She will call me out, if you will, and has the discernment to be able to do that. And I need to trust, and honor her, again, as that fellow heir, like we talked about in the earlier session, that we're in this together. And, the play that pops into my head also is that, not allowing ourselves to become angry, because that, angry can establish a foothold for the enemy. And so I don't remember where the other play is from, but it starts with bitterness. And so if I allow bitterness to come in, based on her perhaps pointing something out or correcting me, if I become bitter and then that slowly evolves to anger, it then talks about eventually moving towards slander and then ultimately malice. And so that's the progression. And so I have to realize that in those moments, there's something bigger than her. And so I need to, in those moments, I try, to step back, be prayerful, and just ask God, literally, God, help. I need you now to give me the words. So this is you now walking with us in the garden. I need you to give me the words to respond in a way that's going to be loving and still encourage and still build her up, even though I don't like, what was just shared with me.
Right.
There's going to be some truth in that perception. So help me to learn that and be very careful right now how I respond. So
yeah, that's great. And I think, that idea of the righteousness of God, a righteous man is a man who is right with God and right with others. So when we're operating out of our own human anger, we're making it impossible to be right with God and right with others. And so this play is so critical in marriage, because we know what love looks like. Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs, love endures. So this is an expression of love. This is an expression of saying, I love what you said. This is bigger than the argument. It's bigger than me being right. I would rather be righteous than right. And I would rather win my wife's heart than win the argument. So I think that's a wonderful reminder for each of our guys that, you may be feeling that a little bit of that competitive edge in these arguments. You want to win. Most men are hardwired to win, but you may be winning at the wrong event. Right? The event is not to win the argument. The event is to win your wife's heart. So, Matt, as we kind of wrap up this session today on communication, maybe just let's pull out a little bit from the scripture and just talk in general. Any other best practices that you might share as it relates to effectively communicating with your wife, understanding that you're waffles, she's spaghetti, you're different people created in the image of God, equally valuable but very unique in the way that you're wired. How do, any other final thoughts about how to best communicate with your bride?
Two things come to mind. The first being for younger husbands is really making sure to set the expectation. And what I mean by that is, make sure that you're always, it's the whole under promise and over deliver. So if you, be very careful about, I'll be home in 15 minutes. Be very careful about making those type of promises and then potentially ending up a half hour late, because she's going to be counting down every single minute that you are late, depending on the situation that's happening at home. Another would be being considerate. Perhaps it's an extended family situation, or just an environment where you have the floor, and you're getting to tell a story or talk, but honey, is there anything you would like to add? So it's including her in the conversation. Those are the two biggies that come to mind. So
that's a good one. I love that. When you're in a social setting, making sure that you're bringing her into it, including her, introducing her, talking well of her, building her up in front of potentially new people that she doesn't know. Those are great insights, because a lot of times, when you go to a social event, there's going to be a conversation on the way home. And you want that conversation on the way home to not be a play-by-play description of everything you did wrong. Right? So really saying, okay, how do I make sure that she feels loved and valued and cared for in every setting, both privately and publicly? That's great insight. Wow, well, what an incredible session. I want to extend a huge thank you to our fantastic co-host, Coach Matt. Thanks for sharing the wisdom and expertise with our guys today. I hope you men will learn how to run the play and put into practice some of the valuable insights and strategies that we have covered today. Remember, as we continue the journey together, come prepared to share your best verse from Colossians chapter 3. Our scripture memory verse this week can be found in James 1:19 and 20. It's the play, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." Again, thank you, Coach Matt. Thank you to you guys for joining us. We will see you next time for another session of Husband Coaching. Until then, take care.